Maybe I can start. Okay. Welcome back, everybody, to the second session and our second speaker of today, which would be Soohyung Lee, and she will talk about endogenous market formation theory and evidence from Chilean college admission.
Thank you. First of all, it's a great honor to be here and meeting old friends. I think I would have more friends familiar, but mostly new. And for those who don't know me, my name is Soohyung Lee. And as I can see, a puzzling and confusing and very difficult to swallow face is that my first name is too complicated for non-Korean. So don't worry about it, just call me Soo. All right. And this paper is joint work with my friends, Ricardo Espinosa at OECD and Hector Lopez at NERA. And I'm from a background of applied economist, so I'm mostly more familiar with the data analysis. And so maybe the perspective or the main focus could be a little bit different from computer scientists for sure and theorists, but bear with me that why I think it's still interesting to you. And if I'm successful for the next 30 minutes, then you will agree with me. Otherwise, you can tell me afterward. All right. Okay, so for this group, I don't have to say how great this market design is, but still for the wrapping up why I'm interested in this particular project is that one of the area market designers are very successful in real world and theoretical perspective is in the application of student and school matching. And in fact, there are a couple of cases and more than growing number of cases in the real world that adoption of well-designed centralized matching algorithm or market design algorithm has been applied and actually shows some evidence that there could be a very significant improvement due to using this well-designed matching algorithm. But then obviously, despite this huge potential benefits and actually realized benefit, there are not, to my point of view, as many applications could be used in the real world. And that made me wonder why this is the case. And my interpretation is that not all market participants are fine with, we're happy with the improvement of efficiency. And actually some of them are better off under more malfunctioning situation. And because of this nature of conflict, there usually third-party intervention, namely policy intervention is usually needed. But then I found out a very interesting case from Chile, from my friend Ricardo, who is from Chile, that for Chilean college admission, actually, some of them and growing number of them are using centralized matching, which is very unusual without the intervention of third party, namely government. And the first case happened in 1967 that some colleges, basically at the time, is all four-year colleges, at the time it's a number of 8, voluntarily formed a centralized matching system to give only one admission to the applicant pool. And that's been happening until 2011. But in the meantime, what happened in between these 67 and 2012, there were there are a batch of new colleges established, especially in the 1980s, and their share of these new colleges have been growing, but they will not be a part of the centralized matching, but they are more like a secondary or marginalized system. But then what happened in 2012 is that these original members of the centralized matching system decided to invite these new colleges to join them. And actually that happened in 2012. And some of these new colleges joined the system, and the coverage of the matching system initially was 100% for four-year colleges, and it dropped to 50% in 2011. And then because of the change, 20 percentage point increase in terms of the coverage of centralized matching. So that made me wonder why this is happening at the initial period, why these four-year colleges in Chile show this unique decision to form a centralized matching, which haven't been shown in many other countries as far as I know. And then why is it the case that they decide to open up this coverage of centralized matching for the new colleges, and why they didn't do it in before, but now in 2012, they decide to do it. So that's my questions, why this is happening. And then what is the consequences of the change in terms of the adoption of the centralized matching and expansion of centralized matching in terms of students in school. So those are the two questions. And I address these two questions, both theory and empirics, but mostly the focus is on the empirical part. So today I'll briefly touch upon the key features of the Chilean college admission system. And I will show you a very simple two-sided matching model. The theory itself doesn't have much of a merit, but still to me it's useful because it guides me what kind of statistics, what kind of empirical analysis I could do using the administrative data. For the two-sided matching model, there are only 2 colleges that capture a group of colleges in Chile, and students are assumed to be heterogeneous in terms of their preferences over these 2 colleges and test score, and importantly, their ability to apply to 2 colleges. So we assume that one college is free of charge in terms of the application, but the other one costs money for the college application. So this is where the quote-unquote the search cost will kick in. And empirical analysis will examine some features that model generate, and actually that is the case in Chile or not, using the data from 2010 to 2013. So what is the main assumptions, or what is the main driver versus not? That is coming from the comparability between colleges. What I mean by comparability is from the student's point of view, whether they like college 1 versus college 2, vice versa. That probability, if it's close to 1/2, it means that 2 colleges, for the student's point of view, they are indifferent, right? And then in terms of the affordability of application costs, if the share of students who can apply for both colleges with enough resources, then there is not much going on in between the 2. But if there is a chunk of students who cannot apply both colleges because of resource constraint, then maybe there could be some way to address it by reducing the search cost by forming a centralized matching. And by centralized matching, I assume that the cost of college application eliminated. That's the key feature. And then because of this reduction in application cost using centralized matching, it implies that the vacancy could be reduced. And the flip side of the vacancy will be the enrollment could go up in terms of the raw number of students who enrolled in each college, or the test score adjusted enrollment. In both cases, we show that the improvement. For the student's point of view, the increase in enrollment or reduction in vacancy, what it means from the student's point of view is their probability to get a college admission will go up. So for that will be beneficial to all students on average. But because of this application cost, for students who were not able to apply both colleges or all colleges because of their resource constraint, adopting the centralized matching, which reduced the application cost into 0, that will be particularly beneficial for students who are not able to apply to colleges or all colleges in this case because of the family background. So this is the main finding I will show you for simple theory model and also the empirical analysis. So how this paper fits into the literature, and obviously there are a lot of studies in terms of the student school matching, and many of you are contributed to the literature, so I will not say all of it. But in addition, from my perspective, what has been very exciting and encouraging to me is that from the both market designers' perspective and also the empirical applied people's perspective, there are a growing number of studies that try to highlight what is the impact of particular school admission system change on the school and students' welfare and outcomes. And there have been a growing number, and we are on we think that this paper fits into the second literature as well. And when it comes to the Chilean case, obviously we are not the first one and we are not the only one. There are many more papers, including these 3 papers. But the focus of the research question is slightly different depending upon the authors. And ours are different from theirs mostly because we would like to understand what makes these universities to form a centralized matching or expand the centralized matching. So that angle will be different from other papers. So brief background of Chile. So for 4-year colleges, so university level colleges in Chile, we could classify them into briefly 2 groups. One is called CRUCH, and the rest I call it as a non-CRUCH. The CRUCH schools can be considered as elite schools like Ivy League schools in the US. They are established mostly before the independence period. Initially it was started with the 8 schools, but it's split into different branches and now currently into 25 schools. The rest of 4-year colleges are currently have 35 schools right now in Chile, and they are mostly established in 1980s. And why this is the case? Before this 1980s period, the establishment of 4-year colleges are very much limited, but the Pinochet allowed for the establishment in that period, so there are a chunk of schools have been established. When they first started, most of them are very small and many of them are under the guidance of the Cruz schools. So it's hard to think it as a usual four-year colleges, but their presence have been growing over time. And in terms of the share of students they host for each year, as of 2011, it accounts roughly 50%, which is this number I showed you. In terms of the college admission, the two groups of colleges are very different, but let me briefly tell you how it works. So in Chile, college freshman quota is set at the beginning of the cycle by the government, set at the beginning, and it cannot be adjusted over the cycle. And before 1967, effectively there is no non-Cruz school, but Cruz school runs their own admission system, just like what they want in the US, and so on. But they decided to group a centralized matching in 1967, and then they gather the collective application process. And as of 2000, how it works is that the students who want to apply to any of the Cruz school, or at least one of the Cruz school, the student apply online and they submit their preference ranking. And then once the Cruz collected all the information and preference ranking and then test score, and the computer runs a Gale-Shapley algorithm for the student proposal and spit out only one admission among Cruz school. So that's how it works. When it comes to non-Cruz school, they run their own decentralized admission system, which is very interesting, which I will show you in a minute. But this part is something that could be efficiency improving, and that's how it works. So what happened in 2012 is the Cruz school initially didn't include this non-Cruz school in terms of their centralized matching algorithm, but somehow with a group of the president of the Cruz school gathered together for multiple times, and they decided they issued a note that all non-Cruz school, if they wanted, could join the centralized matching in 2011, and actually 8 of them out of 35 decided to join. And then from 2012, 33 schools runs the centralized matching. The coverage in terms of the freshman quota that centralized matching accounts for initially in 2011 was a 50%, and it increased to 70%, 20 percentage point increase, which is quite dramatic to my point. So how it works in terms of the actual college admission is that in Chile, all high school senior students have to take an SAT-like test that runs only once a year in December. And then the college application starts in sometime in the mid-December. So how it works is that for Cruz school, as I said before, the students log into a website and rank which school by which major they want to apply, and they're ranking from 1 to 8. So that's how 1 to 10. That's how it works. And then once the application is done, then the test result will be realized in late December. Then application starts for the online application for the Cruz, and then it takes about 2 to 3 weeks when the Gale-Shapley algorithm is spit out the result, and the result comes in, and student can enroll. For the non-Cruz school, how it works is that once the test score revealed, the non-Cruz schools start to accept application, and how they decide which one to accept is quite. Sorry, there should be one more slide that has been missing. Sorry about that. How they make the decision in terms of the non-Cruz school is based on the 3 factors. One is they preset the minimum test score that which student can get accepted. And 2 is first come, first served. Even if some student with the perfect SAT score comes in, but if happen to be that they exhaust all the quota, then the student cannot get an admission from the non-Cruz. And the third one is deposit. So the student have to show up in early enough so that there is a vacancy for whatever the college and major they're interested in. And then they have to pass this minimum test score and pay the deposit, then the student can secure an admission. That's how it works. And as you can see, the application for the non-Cruz school can start right after the test score revealed. And it's before the centralized matching outcome is revealed. The student have to have the dual process if they have enough money to cover the deposit and so on and so forth. So because of this first come, first served feature, the student have to go up early, And actually, this is the 2 photos I borrowed from the website that shows that this is the application for one of the non-cruise school. And how it works is that at the 1 a.m., when the test score is revealed, and then from the morning, or the same day, the morning that the schools start to get an application, the students literally have to line it up. And this is a 1 a.m. By the time it opens up at 8:30, you will see all the lines. So this is how it works. But if you think about the Chile, how it looks, it's a long strip of country. And most of this non-cruise school is located in the capital city called Santiago. So if you as a student happen to live in small city away from Santiago, then literally you have to take hours of bus to drive to go to Santiago, or you have to fly to Santiago to line it up. For students who are coming from the relatively quote unquote poor background, it will not be easy to apply to any of these non-cruise school. So this is the key feature I mentioned. And in terms of the theory, as I said, it's a very simple. Everyone will probably see right away that this is an example model, which I'm okay with it. But still, it allows me to see what kind of statistics I can look for the empirical part. So I just modeled the situation with the two college setting, college 1 and college 2. And the quota of the college 1 and college 2 could give an admission is Q1 and Q2, which is preset, and it's less than 1, which is measured the size of the student. And college tries to maximize the sum of test score of the enrollees, and this is different ways, but for the empirical part, I was just using as a 1. So the sum of test scores of the enrollees, that's what the college cares about. So because the sum, college actually cares about the number, but also if everything goes the same way, if everything else equal, the higher test score would be better off. So just like the simple, which is a good summary of the real world. But the students, we assume there's a unit measure, and they're different in terms of the test score, and they're idiosyncratic in terms of the preferences. So what we assume is that with the probability P less than 1/2, a student will prefer college 1 to college 2, and 1 minus P, the college 2 preferred college 1. This is how I characterize the preferences. And the N is the share of students who can afford the application cost K, and this application cost is needed to apply for college number 2. And in this particular setting, college number 2 is depicted as a non-cruise school, which you literally have to fly to line up, right? And if the students are able to get a admission from their first choice, either college 1 or 2, they will get a payoff of U of F. The second choice will be U of S, not get accepted as a 0. And if student apply for college number 2, will be netted after the application cost K. And then again, we set up this model, try to understand why colleges form a centralized matching at the beginning, or why they meaning the cruise school decide to accept a non-cruise school in 2012, but not before. So we try to understand why this is the case, and this is the summary of 2 different systems from the college's point of view. So what will be a merit for the college 1 or 2 when it comes to the decentralized setting in which they run their own admission? From the setting, we assume that students apply for college number 1 and 2 before they know their true preferences under the decentralized matching. And this may look a little bit funny because in the real world, they know their test score, but we use this timing as an assumption because when you think about the Chilean case, there are dual process for the centralized matching and decentralized matching. But at the time student apply for decentralized non-cruise school, which runs decentralized matching, the students do not know what happened in the centralized matching outcome. So this is a very simple way to depict that situation. And in the decentralized case, students can apply for 2 schools, college 1 and 2, and therefore the student could get at the maximum of 2 offers, and obviously only 1 offer can be accepted. So the 1 rejected offer will lead to a vacancy. So that's a decentralized case. But the centralized case, we assume the students know their preferences before application because everyone is under the centralized matching, so they can rank according to their preferences. That's how we assume, how we depict the situation. And there's no application cost, just like depicting the Chilean case with the centralized matching. And there is only one offer can be made, and therefore there is no vacancy needed. So this is a summary of the situation. And what is the relative benefit of centralized matching compared to decentralized matching? For the college's point of view, the best merit will be all quotas are filled because there are more students than the quota, the sum of the quota, and therefore all colleges form a centralized matching, then by definition, there will be no vacancy because no offer will be rejected. But then because of decentralized matching, a less preferred college may lose its top applicant for the case that they could perhaps secure on the decentralized case, but it's no longer the case. But the student's point of view, this centralized matching could be useful to them because eliminating unfilled seats, meaning the without vacancies, the effective freshman quota is increasing, and therefore more students will be able to get an admission offers. That's a good thing for everyone on average. But then not every student will be beneficial in theory because rich students under the decentralized matching were able to face less competition from the poor but capable students because these poor and capable students will not be able to apply for the decentralized colleges because of the application cost. So this model, we show up the threshold for the cutoff for the test scores, and depending upon whether students are rich versus poor, meaning they can afford the application versus not, we compare the two cases on the centralized matching versus non-centralized matching. But basically, what it says is that if student is wealthy enough to cover the application cost and their test score is good enough, it doesn't matter to them, except for they secure for the application cost. But the student whose test score is very good, but not wealthy enough to apply to their most preferred, and now better off because of the centralized matching. And there are a group of students who could be better off because of the reduction of the vacancy that increased the effective college freshman quota. So for the bottom group of students who were not be able to get on college admission before under the decentralized matching, but on the centralized matching now they can get an offer from college. So this is the summary of the model prediction. So what this simple theory tells you is that perhaps what may be going on in Chile in terms of understanding why some colleges decide to form a centralized matching, why they decide to invite some other colleges to join them, that may be accounted for by comparability of colleges. For the students who prefer colleges, some colleges and the other colleges are roughly the same share, and also the application cost limits the size of pools, the application size of pools for the applicants a college could tap into. In terms of these aspects, if colleges are comparable, then maybe they are better off to form a centralized matching to reduce vacancy. That could be outweigh the possibility of losing top students for better competing institutions. So that's the way we view this system. And from the theory, we derive some of the empirically testable, quote unquote, prediction. And this is what I will show you in the data. So the data-wise, we have a micro-level, individual application level, individual level data from 2010 to 2013. We do have some additional information in terms of the colleges and college by major. But unfortunately, in terms of the early period, we don't have that detailed level, but at least in terms of the qualitatively, we can examine the similar aspects as the latter period. But mostly empirical work is focused on the recent periods of 2010 to 2013. So in terms of the comparability, what it means is that the colleges who join or decide to join the centralized matching will be, among them, will be more comparable. And so what we show you in this table is that in 2012, in 2010 to 2011, the before, the expansion of the centralized matching to some of the non-CRUD schools. We classify the colleges into 3 groups, which is the original CRUD schools, and the non-CRUD school who decide to join the system, and the non-CRUD school who decide to remain away from the centralized matching. So for the case of the non-CRUD school who decide to join the centralized matching, these are the ones who should be similar to the CRUD school. So that's the prediction of the model. And for the raw statistics relative to the non-CRUD school who decide to be away from the centralized matching, they look more closer to the CRUD school. But from the naked eye, it's very hard to see all these different variables. So we use a composite index to predict what kind of, what university joined the centralized matching in 2012 using the variable that we gathered in 2011 to predict which one is what. And then we plot the predicted probability for each school. So how I read this graph is the following. So for the CRUD school, the distribution of colleges of 25 is located in the upper part of the predicted probability. And for the non-CRUD school who joined the system is distributed with this red box. And the non-CRUD school who decide not to join the system is distributed with the green one. So what this graph tells you is that these green graphs and blue graphs are separated in terms of the support, and they are meaning that on average they are very different, whereas the non-CRUD school who decide to join are more likely to overlap with the probability of accepting this centralized matching. And then in terms of the motivation of joining the centralized matching, the reduction of the vacancy is a big deal. So we plot the graph in the 2011 and 2012 for the CRUD school who runs the centralized matching in 2011. Roughly speaking, 50% of their college admission get rejected and unfilled. Whereas in 2012, the number reduced to 8%. So you can say that roughly a 50% reduction in terms of the vacancy, which is consistent with our story that maybe reduction in vacancy could be a good reason to why they want to invite a non-CRUD school to join their system to reduce the vacancies. So probably I have 3 minutes, right? So I will skip the regression part. But basically what it says is that in terms of the raw vacancy number, in terms of the sum of test scores, which is modeled in my theoretical aspect, it goes the same way. And I want to show you this table and maybe wrap it up. And for the empirical economists like me, what this table was very exciting to me. What this table shows is the following. So I rank college by major in terms of this in terms of the cutoff score in the historical way until 2010. So this is not a function of the change of this college admission. 2010. So this is beyond our sample period. And so the number 100 in terms of this previous score means that the university by department that has the highest cutoff score. So only the top Chilean student in terms of the PSU score, the test score, could go only up to that particular one, and 0 means the easiest one to get in, right? The higher number in terms of the prestige means that the student get an admission from more competitive college by major option. So what this regression tells you is that individual level regression and controlling for the test score, where the students live in, what kind of where the students live in, the age and gender and so on, that the information we have. And we regress this outcome the student get an admission from in terms of what type of high school a student graduated from. So in Chile, we can classify the high school into 3 groups. The public, which usually capture the low socioeconomic status students. The voucher students is a private, but it's subsidized by the government. So you can think it's a middle class students can go in. And the private schools are the expensive one that rich students can go in. So how I read the number is the conditional on the test score, gender, and age, and blah, blah, blah. Compared to the private school students, the voucher school students end up getting an admission from and enrolled in the lower ranked school, lower ranked school by major. But that gap has been reduced under the post period when the expansion of the centralized matching happened. And the reduction of the gap is roughly 2/3. And how it's related is that this the gap between private school versus voucher school conditional on everything else is related to the 3% reduction in income for the early career. So this is not maybe not super big, but still, to my point, conditional on test score, everything, just because of the family background, it could be still lower in terms of where they can get an admission. It's still something for meaningful in terms of the empirical part, and it could be reduced in the difference, reduced in terms of the college admission system that lowers the application cost. So as I run out with the time, so I will just conclude. So we studied the system in Chile that shows a very interesting feature of the voluntary adoption of centralized matching. And we set up a very simple model to guide us what kind of statistic and empirical analysis we could do. And to me, what I found very interesting and useful is that one of the motivation why the market designers could do, what market designers can do offer in terms of real world and improving welfare is helping the policymakers to design a better system. But the real world problem is that there will be a lot of setbacks and then complaints from some of the agents who exploit the market dysfunctions. And what this theory, although it's a simple, it tells us is that if the agents are comparable, then maybe it's easier to adopt a better or more obvious solution in terms of market design. So perhaps what the policymakers' point of view could be useful is that before getting into the policy intervention, it may be useful to set up a system so that agents could be more equal or comparable in terms of their market share and ability. Then afterward, they may be able to form, maybe able to adopt a more improved matching system. So that's something that could be useful in the real world. All right, thank you.